Hi, I'm John Nunn, and in this video I'm going to talk about one of my own books, Solving in Style. This book actually has quite a long history. I wrote the first edition of it in 1985, and it was in print for some time, then it went out of print, and eventually I got the rights to the book back again, and I thought it would be nice to reissue it. But on looking through it, I saw that quite a few sections were out of date. Some material really needed to be added and revised, and over the intervening years some of the content was shown to be incorrect. So I thought I'd give it a complete rewrite. So in 2016 I did that and added about 40% extra material and made quite a large number of corrections. So then there was this new, what we call an expanded edition, and originally it was only published in electronic format using Kindle and app, and one of the reasons for this is that it's a bit of a niche subject and the likely sales didn't justify a substantial physical print run. Well, times have changed again, and in 2022 it's possible to do short runs of printing, even print on demand, which makes it possible to have print versions of books which were not viable at one time but now are viable. So I'm quite happy that in the last few weeks the print version of Solving in Style is now available. If you want to get the print version, you have to get it directly from Amazon. The electronic versions in Kindle and Gambit Chess Studio are still available, and it's the app version I'm using to show you the positions from the book today. Well, the aim of the book is to introduce over-the-board players to the world of chess composition, that is to say chess problems and endgame studies. Chess problems are things like mate in 2 or mate in 3, and there are other forms, there are self-mates and helpmates and many other different types of problems, and studies are white to play and win or white to play and draw positions. Well, I've covered a wide range of material in this book. There are some problem areas I haven't touched. I haven't touched on fairy chess, as it's called. So it all uses the normal chess set, the normal chess pieces, and with one or two small exceptions, the normal chess rules. And it's written for over-the-board players, so there's not very much problem jargon. I'm happy to say that over the last, say, 20 years, the world of chess composition has found a much wider following amongst over-the-board players than was ever the case before. So there has been a huge growth in chess solving competitions. There are many national championships in countries all over the world, and there's a world championship for chess problem solving, which I'm happy to say that I have won 3 times. The British Championship has been going on for a long time, and I've managed to pick that one up on 10 occasions. So there's a lot going on, and most of the top solvers are also decent players, although not all. There are some very good solvers who are not strong over the board players. They are problem specialists, but quite a few of the top solvers, such as myself and Casper Pieren and Jonathan Mestel, are also over the board grandmasters. Anyhow, I'd like to show you 3 positions from the book to give you some idea of the content, and I'm always eager to introduce over-the-board players to the fascinating world of chess composition. The chess problems may not actually help you to improve your rating, but they're certainly very enjoyable, even if you just view them as puzzles. Endgame studies, on the other hand, are genuinely helpful for improving over-the-board play, and the famous trainer Mark Dvoretsky was very keen on using endgame studies for training purposes with his students. So both problems and studies are covered in this book. Anyhow, perhaps I should get on to the actual material and show you the first position. Well, here it is. It's white to play and mate in 2. So you might think, well, that's not going to be too difficult. White's a queen and a rook up, and the black king actually has no flight squares. The king can't move at all. All we need to do is to give a check and it's mate. But of course, if it were so simple, it wouldn't be a good puzzle. The first thing you notice is that white can give a discovered check by moving this bishop. So he can move the bishop down this diagonal, for example, to d5. It's not mate, because the rook on b1 is attacked by the black bishop from h7. The bishop could go in the other direction to c2, like this, but then the square c4 is not covered and the black king can just escape. So the obvious checking moves don't lead to mate, and it's unusual for, very unusual for a mate in 2 problem to start with a check. So we're looking for something else, and I'm going to allow you to pause the video here for a few moments so that you can think about how white to play can mate in 2. Okay, time to reveal the solution. If I just click on the link, we can see the text, but I'll explain it. The idea is to lure the black rook to one of these squares, g6 or d3. That will block the bishop's attack on the rook on b1, and then white can deliver discovered checkmate by moving his bishop. So the question is, why should black put his rook on g6 or d3? And the very surprising answer is that white plays, on his first move, king d6. It's a very unlikely looking move for 2 reasons. First of all, it gives the black king 2 flight squares, 2 squares it can move to on b4 or b6, so that has extra freedom compared to the initial position, and also of course it allows the black rook to deliver 2 checks. But first of all, let's see what this king move threatens. It threatens queen to b7 mate, like this, and just going back to the position after the first move, let's have a look at the black rook checks first of all. If black checks with his rook on g6, as I say, the bishop no longer attacks the rook on b1, so white answers bishop e6, that's mate. The bishop blocks the black rook check, and also keeps control over the squares on the b file that the king could flee to. If black, on the other hand, checks on d3, it's a similar story. White plays his bishop to d5, blocking the black rook check and again delivering mate. So then the question is, what happens if black moves his king to one of the 2 squares it can go to? First of all, let's suppose he goes to b6. Now there's no longer the possibility of the king escaping to c4, so that white can use his bishop to block the black bishop attack and deliver mate using the 2 rooks operating on parallel lines. The other king move looks good because the king threatens to take the rook, but it leads to a slightly surprising mate by the white king, discovering mate from the queen, covering the a3 square and using the king to cover the b5 square to stop the black king from moving back. So that's a kind of typical mate in 2 problem. It's got a surprising, unexpected solution, and there are some interesting motifs with the black rook blocking the black bishop on 2 different squares, and the white bishop delivering discovered checkmate either by going to d5 or e6 or c2, according to the variation. Well, there are lots of other mates in 2 for you to solve in this book, but now I'd like to move on to the second position I want to show you, which is different. It's an endgame study. That is to say, it's a white to play and win, or white to play and draw. In this case it's a win, and there's no limit on the number of moves. So this is very much like a game situation, the only difference being you're told that there is a win available, but you have to find the winning continuation. Now this is a bit tough, so I will let you pause the video here. I can only say that if you find the solution, you're doing really well indeed. So take a look at it anyway and see if you have any ideas. Alright, let's follow the link to the solution. Well, white's got this dangerous passed d pawn. He can't push it immediately because black gives a knight check and then takes the pawn. That's a clear draw. So the first move is King f6. It certainly looks very strong because the black knight is actually trapped in this position. It doesn't have any moves where it can't be immediately captured. So black's reply is forced. He has to defend the knight with his king. Now that white has eliminated the possibility of the knight fork on f5, he can push his pawn. Now, one of the difficult things about solving endgame studies, and possibly the most difficult thing in this particular one, is to find black's defence. Because at first sight, it looks like it's all over. The pawn can't be stopped from queening. On the other hand, black's passed pawn can be captured when it arrives at e2. So it might just seem that it's at the end of the game, particularly as this knight check doesn't actually help black at all. White just goes here, and the knight is still unable to come back and stop the pawn effectively. In fact, I see now it's probably even stronger to play the king to e5. Oh, okay, they both win. But black has a cunning defence. He's going to play for stalemate, and the first move he plays is to sacrifice his knight. White, of course, has to take because the pawn's attacked, and then black pushes his pawn. Two possible moves for white here. He can either bring his bishop back to stop the pawn, or he can push his own pawn. So let's have a look to see what happens if he brings his bishop back. Well, it turns out black pushes his pawn anyway, and this is where the stalemate comes in. White doesn't really have much choice but to take the pawn, and it's a draw by stalemate. So it's a mistake to bring the bishop back. Instead, the only realistic alternative is to push the pawn, and black pushes his pawn. Now comes the second subtle point in the study, because you might be tempted to queen, but black queens, and it's a draw. Queen and bishop against queen is a draw unless there's a more or less immediate win, and in fact white doesn't even have a check in this position. Black, however, has many checks with his queen, or for example on h4 or on the f file, or on c3 or a1 or wherever, so there's no chance of white winning this position. So does that mean that there's nothing white can do? No, this is where he plays the clever pawn equals knight. The idea here is that if black now promotes to a queen, white gives a knight check. King has only one square. Now the black queen's attacking the bishop, so the only feasible discovered check is to go to e5 because it prevents the queen taking the bishop. And now suddenly black is losing. If he moves the king to h4, white gives a knight check, forking king and queen. Hopefully winning with bishop and knight against king. Should be able to do that, I think. Alternatively, if the king goes back to h6, then it's mate with bishop and knight. Very attractive conclusion. But the study isn't over yet. Black has a defence. He promotes his own pawn to a knight. And now the sequence I just showed you doesn't work because there's no fork with knight f3 check at the end, because the black knight is covering that square. So white has to find another way to win. Well, the black king is totally imprisoned. Any check by the knight, apart of course from f7, would give mate. So if the knight could come to f5 or to g8 or to g4, that would be mate. But of course black can manoeuvre his own knight to try to prevent this. So for example, if white goes knight here, black moves his knight, and white goes here. Oh, I chose the wrong move there. So if white goes here, sorry, that's the move that doesn't work. Black goes here, white goes here, threatening mate on f5, and knight e3 stops the mate, and the knight gives a check here or here, next move, breaking up the mating net. So actually, the move I tried to show you first was actually the correct move, because from here the knight can head to e7 and then g8, and that square is too far away for black to cover with his knight in two moves. So it's mate in two more moves, whatever black plays. So that was really nice with the stalemate defence, the black knight sacrifice, and both sides under promoting to a knight. It's a typical first-class endgame study with surprising finesses, and yeah, okay, of course a real challenge to solve, and congratulations to anybody who managed it. Well, I did say that there are a wide range of different types of problems, or puzzles if you prefer, in this book, and one of the more unorthodox types is what's called a proof game. In a proof game, you're given the final position which can be arrived at after a certain number of moves. So you're given the position and the number of moves, and you have to work out how this position could have arisen from the normal starting position in the specified number of moves. So under the diagram here it says proof game in 3.5 moves. That is to say, this position, you can see on the left, has to arise after white's 4th move. So normal sequence of moves, all the moves have to be legal, they don't have to be sensible, they can be completely ridiculous, but they must be legal, and this position must arise after white's 4th move. Now, I've shown this to quite a few players, and some people get it relatively quickly, some take longer, but perhaps you might like to take a look, and if you can do it in 10 minutes, then you're doing well. Right, so let's have a look at what we might do to get this position. And there are two real ways of tackling proof game puzzles, and the first is to use pure logic, and the second is to use some kind of inspiration. And I usually find the best strategy is to combine both methods, using logic to a certain extent and then having an aha moment when you see how it all works. Well, black's only played 3 moves. He's clearly played the move d6, and there's no way that white can take this bishop and come back. So for example, e4, queen g4, queen takes c8, queen g4, queen d1, that's 5 moves by white, that's too many. So that means the black bishop is going to make a move. So we've accounted for 2 black moves, d6 and the bishop move. But then if you look at the remaining black pieces, they're all on their original squares. So the 3rd black move can't be by any of them. And using pure logic, we can conclude that black's moves are both made by the missing bishop from c8. And that can't move unless black plays d6. So we can see just from reasoning, logical reasoning, black's 3 moves are d6 and 2 moves by the bishop on c8. Well, let's go back to the initial position and think about how that might happen. White could play e4 and d6. Alright, so suppose black plays, well, it's white's move next. White plays somewhere. Black plays bishop here, shall we say. But now when white takes it, black can't play a second move with the bishop. So bearing in mind that black's 3rd move has to be with the bishop, again going back to the initial position and using logic, or going back to look at this, since black's 3rd move has to be with the bishop, white can't take the bishop until his 4th move. So in other words, white's final move is the capture of the black bishop. And that kind of implies that the bishop is going to be captured by the white queen on the square d1. It's the only way that the bishop can play 2 moves and then be captured by a white piece on white's 4th move. So if we go back to the initial position again, let's try again, e4, d6. Black's bishop now has to get to d1 in 2 moves. So queen f3 is no good because the bishop goes to g4, and then white doesn't have a move here to allow the bishop to go through to d1 and still play the queen to d1 on the following move. So what white has to do is to play e4 and d6, and then queen h5 going beyond the g4 square, and the black bishop goes to g4. White does something, black plays bishop to d1 and white plays queen to d1. Well, that's all very fine except for the lack of a something. Any move white might play in this position would disturb the situation. There's no waiting move with the queen which would allow it to come back to d1 on the following move. So it means something has gone a bit wrong here. White needs a spare tempo at some point in order to achieve the aim of the problem. And we can see where that is. White could have had a spare tempo had he started with e3 and not e4. Black then plays d6. white plays queen to h5, black plays bishop to g4, white plays e4, black plays bishop d1, and white plays queen d1. And that's the solution. The position has now arisen after white's fourth move. And I can give you a good tip for solving proof game problems. And the tip is that one of the conventions of this type of problem is that the moves all have to be completely unique. In other words, there's only one sequence of moves that leads to the given position. There's no way that you can vary either the moves themselves or the order of the moves. And this is actually a powerful weapon in solving proof games, because it tells you that a proof game can never start 1 e4, black plays something, white plays knight f3, because white could have started knight f3 and black plays the same something and white plays e4, and then there would be two solutions, and that's not allowed. So that means that you're quite restricted in the moves which are possible for both sides, and that's usually a very good first step in solving problems of this type. Well, there are a lot more problems like this in the book. I explain about helpmates, selfmates, retroanalytical problems, proof games, and tips for taking part in problem solving competitions. And there are plenty of practice problems for you to work on. Well, I think it's one of the books that I'm most pleased with that I've written, and I hope that you take a first step into the world of chess composition. Thank you for watching my video, and I'll see you next time.